get started, get you guys out on the road, I know everybody wore comfortable shoes. I was impressed. Roy had flats on. No heels. Tammy, what are you wearing?
Heels.
Heels.
Orange pumps. That's how I roll.
And we want to turn the lights down a little bit.
You got the blue music. Yeah, right.
Well, Josh, I may be making it past. Mike, you want to help me shut this music off?
Yeah.
And then we'll get started. We'll, believe it or not, I think we can say everything in about 15 or 20 minutes, and then give you guys a couple of minutes for questions. What are you playing?
That'd be a good background. I like that.
Well, we're here to please. All right, well, I have a lot of people who help me with this. They wrote a script. I will likely not follow this, but I will do my best to get the sentiment out to you guys. Some of you guys may believe that you're here to learn about software, but what I hope you walk away with is more than just what we've attempted to do with the software. Software is important, but what we're really here to talk about is how we ended up here, how we think this is going to change the way things get done, and why we've got enough experience to say that that's a reasonable expectation to have. So Trakref, as you know, is our branded software name for an asset management tool for refrigerants. There are 3 platforms. There's a contractor version, there's a distributor version, and there's a system owner version. And that's probably all you're going to hear me tell you about the software. I'll answer questions about it at the end, but I want to talk about how we arrived at why there are 3 versions and why we think that these Rubik's Cubes on the table will help you walk away with a good idea about the solution and how complex it is. So the marketing people, known as Walt, has asked me to mess up this Rubik's Cube, and we've got a young man over here to my left, Brock. Brock, how many moves should I make when I mess this up?
At least 25.
25, so fortunately I went to public school. I can get to 25. If you'd said 50, I'd have a hard time. What I'm going to do is mess it up, and then I'm going to let Brock come over and solve it. And for anybody who wants to learn about how to solve a puzzle, I think I'm going to close that speaker. Josh, catch. Good catch. Randy, sorry. That was a nice catch, Randy. All right, Randy, why don't you play with that a little bit, mess it up. Brock's going to come over and solve it. When you're all done, you guys are welcome to take these Rubik's Cubes. And if you would like some help, Brock's going to help you solve that Rubik's Cube before you leave. So I want to get going so I can give Brock a chance.
Can I really screw up and add an extra color in here?
All right. This is, hold on a second. What I'm going to start with is about a 3-minute video. This video was built as a tutorial introductory topic for system owners. Now, everybody in this room has been accustomed to working with contractors. Our interaction is with contractors, and we hope that the contractors that we work with as an industry will provide solutions upstream to the system owners. And we are asking those folks to do a lot without our help. The plumbing industry has done a phenomenal job of engaging system owners, show up at their plumbing supply room, pick out the right plumbing item that they want, a sink or a faucet. A $900 faucet's not uncommon at Frank Web Design. And better than Home Depot, and then the contractor will actually send the homeowner in there, and then take the order, and then make the installation at the house. And it's not really seen as a paradigm that changes the way people buy. As a matter of fact, it's encouraged. And I'm going to encourage the same kind of thinking as I go through this explanation. But as I show you this video, I want you to think about it from the system owner perspective.
Why should we care about refrigerants? There was a time when refrigerants were just a commodity. The price was, well, what it was. They were bought and sold with little attention to how bad they are for the environment. Now, international treaties and the emerging actions of regulatory authorities are forcing governments, as well as industry, to reduce the production of highly popular refrigerants. As a result, refrigerants must now be considered a renewable asset. For over 18 years, Polar Technology has been in the business of managing millions of cylinders and tens of millions of pounds of refrigerant. During that time, we have noticed one disturbing yet reliable constant. The gap between the amount of refrigerant manufactured and the amount reclaimed is growing rather than shrinking. Managing refrigerants appropriately will alleviate the problem and help companies save significant amounts of money. We know that over $1 billion of refrigerant goes unaccounted for each year. This occurs in a number of ways. Equipment leaks, recovered refrigerant cylinders get stored somewhere, not all of the refrigerant gets into the system, not all gets out. These refrigerants do not get a chance to experience life cycle management and be reborn to cool again. Did you know that for every 100 pounds of refrigerant that is lost, a supermarket would have to sell 20,000 gallons of milk to make up the cost? We also know that if the proper refrigerants are not available, equipment will not get properly serviced, or will have to be converted to alternate refrigerants, or will be forced to be scrapped. When properly managed, 90 to 95% of refrigerants can be returned to active duty, keeping people cool and things cold at a much lower cost than buying new refrigerants at maintenance time. When refrigerants are tracked, companies can hedge against the increasing cost of new refrigerant while realizing the asset value of refrigerants through their full life cycle. Coordinating the components of the value chain has been a complicated puzzle to solve. Until now. Puzzle solved. Trakref transparently follows the life cycle of every molecule of refrigerant. It allows us to maximize their worth and create new revenue opportunities at every single point of the value chain. We can now harness the usefulness and value of billions of missing dollars of refrigerant, minimize the need for new refrigerant production, and lower the cost to businesses of purchasing refrigerants, all while doing good for the environment. Fewer and smaller checks will be written. Everyone wins. Are you going to be part of the solution? We are.
I'm glad we all left the lights on so you all stayed awake. So that was good. Does that make sense to everybody? Anyone have any questions on the message? Okay. Again, that's intended for system owners. That's intended to open up their eyes to what's happening with their refrigerants. Now, we can no longer conduct business as usual. How many people remember a switchboard? Mike, you picked an interesting image for this one. If you look at our cell phones today, they're completely different. We're accessible 24/7. We don't have to have phones forwarded, and business as usual is not going to solve our servicing issues for the marketplace. We've had what would be considered some draconian cuts in refrigerants, but they weren't a surprise. We've known for 17 years that these cuts were going to be taking place. We even knew the time frame, and we knew generally what they would be. We know that by 2015 there'll be no more than 35 million pounds of 22 available. Ironically, we're the very same industry that's choosing to use and sell and continue to deploy HCFC systems, even though we recognize that there'll be a limit on the availability. So this material is essentially obsolete. The CFC problem was not as big as the HCFC problem. The CFC problem was commercial, industrial. The HCFC problem is it's medium temp, high temp, low temp, it's everywhere. It's air conditioning contractors and refrigeration contractors. There's not going to be a person that's left out. So as we go towards the solution, we started to take a look at what was happening here. Now, if I could draw a line across the bottom, And to explain the slide a little bit, the blue boxes are CFCs, the green are HCFCs, and of course the HCFCs and HFCs. If you look along the bottom here, this is time and this is volume. We can see that the size of the industry grew. I did bubbles because no one ever remembers the numbers. But the takeaway here is that as the marketplace grew, reclaim stayed flat. It never accounted for more than 7% of the market's availability for refrigerants in any year. And that's regardless of how many new reclaim plans came into the market. I've seen people buy refrigerant. I've seen people sell refrigerant. Not one time did that needle ever move. One of the peak years for R12 was 2.8 million pounds. That was a peak year. We're reclaiming about 8 million pounds of R22 right now. And as we waded into this, we started to ask questions in our own industry space about what was happening. You know, normal questions. We'd go to Hardy meetings, we'd go to traditional association meetings, we'd go to engineering meetings. We started to evolve in a different direction around 2007 and asked if we could be part of the engineering groups that were making the decisions about equipment and why they were choosing it. And we were fascinated at the outcome. There was almost a complete disconnect between the strategic decision about what asset to buy and the options available at the level where they made the purchase. And we found that purchasing and accounting, finance, facilities, they didn't all speak the same language. But what we also found, which was disturbing and troubling, was that it wasn't at our level that they were seeking out solutions. At our level, they were saying, what's our cheapest option? Here's our engineering solution, and now we have to plug in an option that will fit, that's affordable. And if we can come in below that number, I think we've all heard this before, you can have the job. So it could have been a 22 unit, it could have been an R123 chiller, it could have been an inappropriately sized air handler, or inappropriately sized condensing unit. And then we ask ourselves, well, can we retrofit? Well, retrofit options are really limited. Because if things aren't engineered well together, then dropping in a different refrigerant, it sure will keep things running, but it won't give, it won't manage the expectation of what the system owner is really anticipating the outcome should be, which is an adequately climate controlled room. So when we looked at this, we were like, okay, so let's start with some simple stuff. Is that like a trick to get me to quiet down? So we knew that reclaim was pretty small. But we saw this growing evolution of refrigerants. 22, 123, 124, all the HCFCs, yep, they're bigger. A lot more of them, and we all know it. There's also no tax on the 22, so the EPA didn't have that vehicle to manage it with. And as we move towards HFCs, I already can hear people at the system owner level say, hold on a second, you mean I bought a machine that's obsolete, or it's trending obsolete in the next 3 years? How do I avoid that with this new HFC regulation? Because if you look at the one thing that we left out in the last market change, it was the system owner. How many people in this room have talked to a system owner recently? You, Ron, you guys don't count. Ron, I mean, Rick, you. What are they saying?
What do you got?
They're saying, what do I do? How many people heard about the news 2 weeks ago on the R22 allocation? Okay. You picked up the phone and you called your wholesaler. You called your biggest customer. Anybody call the system owner and say, you're not going to believe it, but we've got a lot less refrigerant out there? Not many of those phone calls were made. So as this problem gets bigger, we have to have different solutions because the ones that we've been using have flatlined reclaim. And they haven't flatlined reclaim, and I'm not really here to talk just about reclaim because that's not really significant. What they've done is they've not moved the needle. They've not encouraged somebody to make a different decision. Recycling isn't important. Carbon's not an issue. Our industry, as a rule, pushes back on embracing carbon as an option for the future. We see it as a negative. We're not sure. It's a new horizon. We're uncomfortable with it. And that type of resistance is not leading towards new solutions. So we had to ask ourselves a bunch of questions. You know, some of them we've already talked about here. But we started asking system owners other questions too, like how much they know about their leaks. California, we have new rules about AB 32, and you have to register a system. There's only 297 registered systems in California. California's a big state. Any system over 2,000 pounds is supposed to be registered. Most system owners have no idea about that. And those system owners are fairly complex, sophisticated environments like Disney. The state of California hasn't registered their own systems. Department of Motor Vehicles has a 5,000 pound charge in a chiller. It is not registered. Their building abuts the Department of Environmental Services in Sacramento. So within 100 feet, they have no idea what their responsibilities are. Then we asked them how they manage their environment. We got different answers. And then we asked them where their recovered refrigerants go. And the state of California said, well, they must be destroyed. I said, well, do you have records on that? They said, no. And as it turned out, when they did an audit, they found that their refrigerants were being recovered. They were spending tens of millions of dollars on retrofits statewide. The gases were coming out, they were going to non-certified reclaimers. Then those gases were being sold off to, some cases reclaimers, some cases direct. And then the one outcome that the state of California did not intend to invest tens of millions of dollars in happened. That gas went into other leaky systems. Now, the smart money is on the future. Smart money in the future is not on that outcome happening, because once there's an awareness to it, you know that they're going to start to manage it differently, and we're already starting to see those trends. But these questions started to drive a different understanding, because we found that as we lowered prices or managed the environment or built up stockpiles, we would get different outcomes, and they weren't all positive outcomes. Now, this image, I mean, everyone knows what this is, right? Phantom of the Opera. Okay. So we had a new term. Actually, that guy over there in the black shirt at the table on the side over here, Chase, he came up with it. And it was called phantom emissions, because we didn't want to tell people, well, your gas is being stolen. It went missing. You know, in the retail industry, they call it your assets have legs. Again, politically nice terms to help people understand what's happening. Now, the reason this becomes important is because we decided we wanted to understand, where's reclaim going? How can we be part of solving that problem? And we got some interesting numbers. For instance, we saw growth last year in used refrigerants coming back that were blends. So you ask yourself, okay, why are blends going up? 22's not going up in some cases, but blends were. People recovering more blends all of a sudden, because a 20% jump is huge. And the answer was no. As we went out, we've done over 1,000 interviews in the field. A lot of them in conjunction with some of you people, a lot of them with your customers. But what we found out was, this was interesting, all gas recovery had gone up. Owners of companies said, holy cow, this stuff is worth $10 a pound, don't let it go. But it's only worth $10 a pound to us, right? We only think about it in our space last year. But what was it worth to a contractor? If you're up in New England, saw contract rates, union rates, non-union rates of R22 being installed in a variety of different systems in a range of $37 to $72 per pound. So we think about the problem in our perspective. We go, okay, hold on a second. So let's just use an average number of $50 a pound. That means every recovery cylinder is worth $1,000 to the guy who's got control of it, right? So he can install it into a system. It's a much bigger problem now. Now this becomes $1 billion problem. So you heard that number in the middle of the video, if you're paying attention. It said, missing about $1 billion of refrigerant. Well, that number took a lot of time to come up with. But we estimate that there's approximately 36 million pounds of refrigerant recovered every year. And only 12 million make it back to reclaim. We're not after an enforcement issue. Okay, big deal. These guys are doing the right thing. They're recovering refrigerant. Talk to their bosses. Big companies, publicly traded companies, private companies that are massive, MCORs, Lakes, ServiceMaster, Sears, said, hey, what are you doing about this? What if that gas you're controlling, you don't have access to in 8 months when there's a bigger shortage? What are you going to do about that? Well, we'll retrofit. Well, maybe. We got warranty issues. Then we also have compatibility and size issues. You can retrofit a system, it doesn't mean it's going to work. And the commercial sector has a bigger problem than the residential sector, probably. Now, I'm not an equipment guy, so I won't purport to know exactly what they're thinking. But I know that after enough interviews, they were worried. And what these system owners were worried about was, will I have enough refrigerant to keep this piece of equipment running? And what the contractors were worried about was, well, what happens if I run out of refrigerant, but my competitor doesn't? My solutions are limited. And then they had another question. Because remember, I told you there's 24 million missing pounds. At first, these guys were very predictable. They said, you know what? Well, that's because we take only the gas that we can't use that day. When we need empty bottles, we bring it back to somebody. So we're making all that money. But when we started tracking their cylinders, we found that, well, what the boss doesn't know wasn't killing. And if they used that job on a gas on a side job, or if they used 10 pounds of gas instead of 5, Boston wouldn't know about it. They had no trackability of that asset. So this term phantom emissions all of a sudden started to worry some people, and we decided to do some pilot projects. So we sprung into action about last May, and we put some pilot projects out there. And lo and behold, we found out that on average, commercial guys were pulling out about 500 pounds a year. And only about a third of that was making it back to reclaim. But once the boss could manage the other 2/3, now you got a really sizable asset. You talk about a big mechanical company, like, you know, anyone that's got more than 5 or 10 employees, you're starting to talk about some decent amounts of gas. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of gas. And we saw it happening. We saw some projects happen in the Southeast. You would think that we'd do this in California first. Ironically, we didn't. We couldn't get anyone to get involved. People paid more attention to the economics than the regulations. What we saw was fascinating. We saw Las Vegas. We saw the Southeast. We saw the Northeast. We saw the Mid-Atlantic. We saw the Midwest. We saw system owners and contractors starting to recover gas and track it. We didn't just track it through the software system. We've interviewed these guys, and they're like, this software is great. We have no idea how it works. Somebody does the magic back in Poland. We input the numbers, and they can see it. Then they can pull it up. But what we found was, once they could track it and they paid attention to it, the recovery numbers went up substantially, by a factor of 3. That meant that if you're a service company and you're doing work, you actually have a chance to impact your bottom line. It means you're not going to lose out when the service gas runs out with 45 million pounds. What else does it mean? It means that if there are 45 million pounds gas out there being produced, and there are 36 million pounds being recovered, we're talking about some parity here. If we're talking about parity, that means that every drop of refrigerant is equally valuable. We haven't had any pushback on whether people will reuse recovered refrigerant or not. So if we can't measure it and we can't manage it, what do we measure and manage? So this problem became very complex. The Rubik's Cube is not done by mistake. There's 6 sides to this puzzle. There's not 7, there's not 4. If there were, we would have bought a 7-sided Rubik's Cube. Not sure how we would have done that, but we'd ask Brock to help. Now, the last piece of this puzzle that came together was the dispose part. You may be asking yourself, why is that important? It's carbon. We can't not pay attention to it. It has equal merit to the other 6 sides. No side is more important than the other. Virgin gas. If we don't adequately track the virgin gas that we're using, and most of our industry uses disposable cylinders, then we're leaving a part of this puzzle out. Distribution. Absolutely critical. I can't tell you how many times I've interacted with a contractor that said, hey, we're big enough, let's work with you directly. And we've had to tell them, no, I'm pretty sure we would fail at that. Because distribution is a critical part of this. Having access to small amounts of gas or dropping off small amounts of gas is the key to building the puzzle. Installing and removing, critical. You can't track and manage every drop of molecule that goes in or out of the system, and I'm not talking about 50 pounds or more or 5 pounds or more. I'm talking about all of it. It's not complex. By the way, give this guy a round of applause. Good job, Rob. But there's 2 other aspects to this. Life cycle, and we're talking about 2 different life cycle thought processes here. One is the life cycle of the molecule and how it moves through the system, and the other one is the life cycle of the asset. But both life cycles need to be tracked. And then the final aspect of this is the system owner. If we do not engage the system owner, we leave an important aspect of this out. So, okay, I went to this bright kid from Vanderbilt and I said, we have a real easy problem for you to solve. We want you to come up with an idea, a tracking program that can track in all of these spaces, but not preclude or support one over the other, and we don't want to disrupt our supply chain. We don't want to work with contractors and jump over wholesalers, and we don't want system owners to jump over their contractors and go to the distributors or go to the OEMs. We want to create a more symmetrical relationship. Can you do it? And he said, no problem. And by the way, that's why you hire young guys, because they have no idea the complexity of the issues they're about to face. So they just say yes. And when they start saying no, you just raise the paycheck and they say, okay, back at it again. And what we found was something that was evolving in the marketplace and other places that we hadn't paid much attention to. And that's this, once you use transparency and you share all your data. So we went to Rick Nelson, guys like Rick Nelson around the country, and we said, hey, we've got a great idea. We'd like you to share all of your reclaim numbers with your customers, and then we'd like them to share it with their customers. He's like, great idea. No, he didn't say great idea. He's like, are you out of your mind? He's like, I'll think about it. Call me in 3 months. Which meant, I hope Ted forgets about this, and in 3 months he thinks about something different. Because I've been known to do that. As you can tell, I haven't changed the page once on the script. So I'm not exactly paying attention to the normal track here. But the transparency is key here. Because you can't have a team if you don't have transparency. So now, a team works really well when they all know what the other one's intending to do. But it doesn't work really well when we've got compartmentalized solutions. So we look at it and go, okay, we've got a system owner. How do we engage a system owner? Well, the system owner cares about what? Leaks, longevity, but something that's super important to them that we don't often hear, it's called system uptime. How long can I keep my machine running? How well does it run? Is it at its efficiency? Do we even know of a reference point we can refer to when a customer says, how much energy should this unit be using in this environment? At this temperature, with this load on it? We don't have an objective number in that industry space to be able to point them towards. It's a subjective number in most cases. We even have a challenge in the industry with SEER ratings. So we look at SEER ratings and say, okay, most people don't get the SEER ratings right. And as a result, how can we actually anticipate what that system should be using energy-wise or refrigerant-wise? And what should it be able to provide cooling-wise? We can do some rough numbers, but they're not always accurate. So we had to ask, could this transparency thing work? Could we get system owners to work together with contractors, to work together with wholesalers, and then support it? So we did it. Once and twice. And by November 1st, I said, Chase, how many times have we done this? And he said, hold on, I'll pull up a number. And he opened up Trakref. 50,000 times. In 2012, we did this 50,000 times. We have 50,000 collaborative events that occurred in 2012. More to come this year. And that's why the puzzle is solved. It's important for Rick or any wholesaler to be able to track the virgin gas activity, support contractors. It's important to be able to track all of this stuff, but we can't make it so complex that they don't use it. So when I tell you that they used it 50,000 times, that's 50,000 events that contractors managed. Now, if we look at the average contractor, we say, okay, on the residential and commercial side, we can break this down. We start to look at numbers, and they're big, and the needle moved. And in contractors that engaged in the process with the wholesale partners, we saw a 20% increase in reclaim. That's organic growth. That's not growth that was stolen because we were better and we beat another competitor. We didn't ask our guys, our wholesalers. We didn't want to grow our wholesale business. We wanted to go to their existing customers and say, can we help you? And the system owners, they liked it because what did they get? The one thing that's important to them. Yes, money's important, but compliance was important, and awareness about what the outcome on their gas was important. It's not just important in California because our first customers were mostly SEC schools that started to ask these questions. Well-run operations want to know exactly where everything's going. Not intellectual West Coast operations that are environmentally green, and yes, there are Priuses everywhere. And I know because I drive a 3-quarter-ton pickup truck that's not the world's most efficient thing. And I look down on those Priuses and I think, gosh, gas at $4 a gallon in California is kind of pricey. And the reason that becomes important is because when those economics are driving decisions and we see that you can create relationships with your contractors and then they can use this as a tool with their system owners, it's a win-win for everybody. So the 6 sides of the puzzle are the 6 evolutions of where refrigerant and the life cycle for all these systems run through. And there's downline things that are affected through that as well, and I will flip to my slides now, give you what those are, but they include things like if you solve this puzzle adequately across this range, you're going to be compliant, regulatory compliant. You're going to get the best economics because you're going to pay attention to all the different aspects of it. You're not going to have availability issues because you're going to have good planning. And any of the other myriad of things that you may not see represented on this are solved when you get the puzzle right. So achieving system uptime is going to be the key. So if we take our focus off of, for a second, the actual value or cost of refrigerant, we say, let's instead find out how we can be part of this team. So what we're going to ask, and we have been asking our partners to do, is to create collaborations. Cross-discipline collaborations. Work with the contractors. Help them engage the system owners. Differentiate yourself. And it's working. And we're seeing that growth. And distributors that we did not have engaged in this process through 2012, we saw an increase in mixed gas. We saw a change in the way they get their refrigerant back. We saw a decrease in R22. We saw mixed gas between 33 and 55%. The reason this is important is because, not that we care necessarily that Reclaim is driving all this, because it's not. But what we cared about was how do we measure the outcome? And we were able to do it. This is life cycle management. It's investment planning, it's project definition. You guys will all have access to the slide. There's a lot going on here. And your part, you may look down there and say, well, okay, I'm the supplier interaction guy. Well, you're more than that. You're the solution provider in that space. And you're one of 4 components that are super important to that outcome. And most of these system owners would make different decisions if they were aware of the fact that these gases were becoming obsolete. Now, I don't have much else to add to that. I could talk all day, as you can tell. But does anybody have any questions? It's amazing, no question.
You mentioned how many of us told customers about R22 last 2 weeks ago. Well, I think there's probably a good number of contractors who did, if they're servicing those systems, but I know that's only one group, at least the reputable ones.
And I think you said it best. I mean,